Good afternoon, or good morning again, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, good afternoon, Dr. McIntyre.
Good morning.
We are so excited that you are here with us today.
Thank you.
My name is Lori Cunningham, and I serve as chairman of the Polk County School Board. We welcome you to beautiful Polk County, and we are so delighted that we're going to get an opportunity to get to know you a little better as you have the opportunity to learn about us a little bit more through this interview process. So at this time, I would like to begin by introducing my esteemed colleagues so that you can put a name with a face. To begin with, from District 1, we have Dr. William Allen.
Good morning.
Good to see you again.
Thank you.
District 2 is represented by myself. From District 3, we have Ms. Sarah Fortney.
Good morning.
From District 4, we have Ms. Sarah Beth Reynolds.
Good morning.
From District 5, we have Mrs. Kay Fields.
Good morning
Good morning,
again.
Ms. Fields.
From District 6, we have Mr. Lynn Wilson.
Good morning.
And from District 7, we have Mrs. Lisa Miller.
Hi, good morning. Nice to meet you.
Good morning, Ms. Miller. You too. Thank you.
And at this time, I would like to introduce a few staff members that are present today. First of all, we have Mr. Wes Bridges with us this morning. He is our general counsel to the school board. And we also have Miss Linda Baldick, who is our executive secretary for the school board.
Nice to meet you.
And I believe that's all for now. Now I would like to review the interview process that we're going to be going through this morning,
Very good.
and a little bit of a timeline for you so you kind of know what to expect. We will have 2 hours for the board interviews. You will have around 5 minutes here in just a few minutes for an opening statement. And then each board member will ask a series of thematically based questions, such as around student accountability, operations management, instructional leadership, and so forth. Each board member will have 15 minutes to ask up to 4 or 5 questions, and the number of questions will depend upon each of the responses. And then if we are approaching the 5-minute mark, then I will flag you a little bit and let you know that there's 2 minutes left so that you can wrap up your thoughts. You will have time at the end of the interview for any final thoughts, closing comments, whatever you might like to say. And then most of us, will be taking notes during the interview so that we can go back and discuss those when we discuss our deliberations next week.
Very good.
So with that, let's go ahead and get started. We will start with allowing you, Dr. McIntyre, around 5 minutes for any opening comments or thoughts that you might like to share with us, and you may begin.
Very good. Well, thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to be here in Polk County. Enjoyed our short little tour that we had this morning. I know we'll continue to be able to see much of the community going forward in the next couple of days. So thrilled to be with you today, and thank you for your consideration of me as a candidate for your next superintendent of schools. My name is Jim McIntyre. I currently serve as the director of the Center for Educational Leadership at the University of Tennessee, and we do a number of things around principal preparation and principal support. We provide support to sitting principals in terms of we facilitate what's called the Tennessee Rural Principals Network, and we also provide leadership coaching and support to executives in school districts and also to superintendents in Tennessee and across the country. So excited about the work that we do. I guess by way of introduction, what I would say about myself is I'm an educator. I spent a short amount of time as a classroom teacher, but I've spent more than 30 years in the field of education. My entire adult life, my entire professional career in the field of education. I've worked at the university level, but most of that time has been spent in K-12 public education. I taught high school at a small alternative high school in East St. Louis, Illinois, and that was an incredibly important experience in my life and in my work and in my professional life. We taught in East St. Louis at a time when there was a lot of crime and poverty and chaos in the lives of our students. But what I found was that when we were able to engage our kids in learning and minimize some of the distractions that were going on in their lives, and when they were able to get a taste of academic success, it was magic. It was incredible. It was transformational, as education can be. And so that was a really important moment in my life, and one that was incredibly formative to the rest of my career. And I've spent the rest of my career really trying to ensure that students have opportunity to be successful and to really have a bright future. So I spent 11 years in the Boston Public Schools as the budget director and as the chief operating officer in the Boston Public Schools at a time when we had really a great school system. We had really stable leadership. We had the same mayor, school board chair, and superintendent for 11 years. So that was, and I think, just had great teachers and a wonderful community, and because of that, we were able to see some really exciting learning gains for our students. And the Boston Public Schools was seen as one of the best urban school districts in the country at that time. And then I had the opportunity to go to Knoxville, Tennessee, as the superintendent of schools there. And again, a wonderful community and a great landscape for public education. Really excellent school board, engaged community and parents, excellent teachers, great kids. And so we were able to, over my 8 years as superintendent, we were really able, as a community, to see some extraordinary learning outcomes for our young people. We saw increases in student achievement and student growth. We saw narrowing of achievement gaps, actually, gaps defined by income or race or disability, language area. We were able to make some progress in narrowing those achievement gaps. And we saw our high school graduation rate increase from 79.3% when I began to 90.3% at the end of my 8 years as superintendent. And all of that progress, all of that great work with students culminated in the Knox County Schools being named an exemplary school district by the state of Tennessee. And that's the highest level possible within the accountability system in Tennessee. And in 2015, when that occurred, only 12 school systems out of 146 in Tennessee were designated as exemplary. And the Knox County Schools was the only large metropolitan school system to ever earn that distinction in the state, still to this day. So we're really proud of that work that we were able to do for children in the Knox County Schools in Knoxville, Tennessee, and very proud of the collaborative work we did as a community to make that happen. I come from a family of educators and a family of immigrants, and so education is incredibly important. My dad and my mom were both educators at different levels of the spectrum. My dad was a university administrator. My mom was a pre-K teacher, and so I got the full spectrum of education. And education was incredibly important to my family to be able to, as for anyone else, to be able to access the American dream and to be able to build a bright future. I'm also a parent. My wife and I have 2 children, both of whom recently graduated from the Knox County Schools. And so this work of education is very personal to me. It's very critical to me. It's important to me. It is something that I'm passionate about. And what I want for all of our students here in Polk County Public Schools and all of our schools is what I wanted for my own kids. I want them to be academically successful, economically competitive, and personally fulfilled. And that's what I work every day to make sure happens in our school systems. And so again, this work is a passion for me. This is more than a job for me. This really is, I see this as a calling. I see this as a vocation in a way, and what I'm really meant to do. And so I look forward to the opportunity to potentially work with you all as your superintendent and to continue to engage and embrace around providing a wonderful public education to all of our students here in the Polk County Public Schools.
Thank you, Dr. McIntyre.
Thank you.
So I'm going to begin the interview with a few general topic questions, if
Great.
you will.
Wonderful.
And then each one of us will be asking you a few questions as we move along.
Outstanding.
Please introduce yourself. I think you kind of did, but there might be some things you might want to add. And then if you could choose one word or one phrase that describes you, what would it be and why?
Great. Well, I think by way of introduction, I think I did introduce myself, fairly comprehensively. But I would say this: I've got a great job right now. I'm at the university. I was telling Dr. Allen this morning. He's a fellow in the academy with me. That I've got a wonderful job at the University of Tennessee, where we do great work supporting educational leaders and being able to really provide aspiring principals and sitting principals with support and development. But I really do feel that I feel called back to the work of having a more direct impact on the lives and futures of young people. I feel that while I have great flexibility and probably less scrutiny at the university level, that this work that you all do as a school board and that the leadership of this district does for children is incredibly important. And I feel called back to it. I feel called back to having that kind of direct impact on the lives and futures of young people because of the influence and the positive impact you can have for children. And so this is, the work I seek to do. This is the work that I really want to partner with you all to do, to really have an impact not only on the young people in this community, but on the community as a whole. And so in terms of a phrase that I would describe myself as, I think student-centered is where I would start. And because, as I know you do, because I've observed some of your board meetings and some of the decisions that you've made, some of the difficult decisions that you've had to make, first, foremost, and always, it begins with kids. It begins with what are the needs and the interests of our children, and how do we meet those needs? And that is the focus of the work. So I would really say that student-focused is the way I try to approach the work of leading in public education, and it is how I try to make decisions. And that's not always easy. That gets hard. That gets challenging. And sometimes, I think, for the most part, the interests of children are aligned to the interests of adults in our school systems. But sometimes, if those interests slightly diverge, I'm really going to choose to be on the side of what's best for students, what's best for children. And sometimes that can get uncomfortable, and sometimes there's some pushback. But I think it's important that we know what our North Star is, and mine is making decisions based on what's best for kids.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. Dr. McIntyre, could you give us a glimpse into your transition style? Could you please share how you will get to know our school district, our wonderful staff, our incredible programs, evaluating our financials, integrating into the community, and so on?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thank you. And I've thought a little bit about this because this is a non-traditional time, right? This is a very unusual moment to be making a transition into a school system, and during a pandemic. So I've thought about this in terms of an entry plan that's a little bit non-traditional and a little bit probably longer in terms of the planning horizon than you might usually look at. I mean, normally you're going to think about a 90-day plan or a 100-day plan. I think it's a longer planning horizon because of the situation that we're in right now. So I would think about the entry plan in terms of really 3 phases, and I would call them recovery, discovery, and delivery. And recovery is first about just acknowledging that we're in this global pandemic and we're in this very non-traditional moment in public education, and we need to get back to the normal rhythms and routines of schooling when we come back to school in the fall, and make sure that our students are, if students have been struggling academically, if they need intervention or support, that we provide that. If students have experienced trauma during this crisis, as we know many of our students have, to really address that question and provide our students the support. And I also think part of recovery is acknowledging the extraordinary work that our teachers have done and our staff has done and our leaders have done during this pandemic, amidst really the most challenging of circumstances, and finding ways, big and small, to appreciate and thank and really express our gratitude to our teachers and our staff and our leaders who have stepped up and done this incredible work during the pandemic. So that's sort of the recovery phase and getting back to, people are saying sort of the new normal, hopefully a better normal going forward, because we've learned some things. And I think that leads to the next phase, which is discovery. And for me, discovery would be about some of the traditional entry plan activities of listening and learning and hearing from different constituencies and talking with teachers and with parents and with stakeholders and visiting schools and having small group conversations and one-on-one conversations and really immersing myself in understanding the needs and the interests and the priorities of this school system. And I think that area of discovery certainly includes looking at data and understanding where our students are, what kind of gaps in learning have perhaps emerged from the pandemic, what kind of inequities have been exacerbated during this pandemic, and really identifying some of those, but then also acknowledging we've learned a lot during this pandemic. We've learned a lot about ourselves and how to educate students and what works, and we've learned new methods of teaching. We've learned technology, we've learned new technologies that we hadn't utilized before. We've learned really creative and innovative ways to engage parents and the community in the conversation about education. And we've learned ways to personalize and individualize and support students, both academically and through their social and emotional needs. And so I'd want to make sure that through that phase of discovery that we also acknowledge some of the really good things that have come out of this unfortunate and really trying crisis, that we've learned some things and been able to, we will be able to utilize those things going forward toward what I hope will be a better new normal going forward. So that's the discovery. I think part of that would culminate in the development of what I hope would be a detailed and comprehensive 5-year strategic plan for the school system, to be able to say, to listen to our stakeholders, to our parents, our teachers, and others, identify the interests, the priorities, and the aspirations of our community around public education, and then translate that into a really detailed and comprehensive strategic plan that the board, the community, the administration could really get behind and feel good about. And then we'd move on to delivery. And delivery is the word that is used in the UK when they talk about implementation and execution. And I like that word, not just because it sort of fits with my poetry, but because it really connotes this idea of delivering on promises and delivering what we need to deliver for our students. And so that next phase would be about execution of the strategic plan. It would be about implementation of the strategic plan. And the one thing I know about strategic planning is that you have to follow up. You have to be purposeful and intentional about implementation, or it's not going to, it's not going to happen. And so being really purposeful and disciplined about implementation of that strategic plan and being able to be disciplined about putting that strategic plan in place, I think will deliver on the promises of a great education for all of our kids.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. Dr. McIntyre, what is your experience advocating for or against legislative issues that impact school districts?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's important for educational leaders to take a proactive role in recognizing potential legislation that may come down and may impact the work that we do with students every day. And so I have always tried to be, a voice of the school system, a voice for children, a voice for teachers, a voice for our parents around public education, and certainly did that when I was budget director and chief operating officer for the Boston Public Schools in Massachusetts. Certainly did that as superintendent of schools in Knoxville. And what does that mean? It means, first of all, I think part of it is really showing up and being that voice, being at, in our context in Tennessee, a county commission meeting, or recommending to the Board of Education, what are some potential legislative agendas that they might want to consider. Providing testimony. I was called to testify at the at the General Assembly, which is our state legislature in Tennessee, on multiple occasions. I was actually invited on 2 occasions to testify before Congress on education issues that I think were important. One was around developmental teacher evaluation. That was with the House of Representatives. The other was on the Senate Help Committee when they were considering reauthorization of the No Child Left Behind Act at the time, which became the Every Student Succeeds Act. So having those opportunities formally to provide testimony, to advocate for legislation that is important for our children, that's important for our teachers, that's important for our schools, I think is incredibly important. But I also think having good relationships with policymakers and lawmakers informally is also critically important because, as you know, some of those decisions are made not just in a hearing room or not just on the floor of a particular legislative body. They're also made in multiple conversations and in influential discussions that are had throughout, while the legislature is in session and beyond. So I think it's really important to have those types of relationships with both local, state, and national policymakers and legislators so that we can have an influence on those conversations and ensure that those policy conversations are well informed and have the best interests of our kids at heart. So I think having that voice and being a voice for those who aren't also necessarily always at the table in those conversations is really important.
Thank you. Dr. McIntyre, we have several quality finalists for this position. Can you tell us why should the board select you?
Yes, I think I can. I think there's a couple of things, and I agree with you. I think you've got a great slate of candidates who are well qualified and all seem like wonderful people. I believe what sets me apart is my experience and my track record of success. So I have been a superintendent. I was a superintendent of schools for 8 years. And as you know, in large school systems, the size of Polk or the size of Knoxville, the average tenure for a superintendent is 3.5 years. And I was able to serve the children and the families of Knoxville for 8 years as superintendent. And I think that's important, first of all, because I have the experience of being a leader. I've been a superintendent. I've been in that seat, and as Superintendent Byrd knows, it's intense. It is challenging. It is 24/7. It is all the time, and there are different pieces of information and challenges coming at you from every direction. And I've experienced that. I've had that experience, and I was able to, in that role, have some great success as an educational leader, to facilitate some great success with our community for children, and to have that track record that I talked about earlier, which is to have seen increases in student achievement and student growth, to have seen narrowing of achievement gaps, to have seen an increase in our high school graduation rate, and to have been identified as an exemplary school district. I think those are all important elements of seeing the kind of success that we're able to have. And what the role of superintendent requires is multifaceted. It requires someone who can work with a board of education like you all, and I think you've got a fabulous board here. But my time in Knoxville, I had 21 different school board members over the 8 years when I was superintendent. So it requires to continuously build relationships and build a working relationship with board members, with other stakeholders, with lawmakers, as I talked about. And I think that it also requires a singular focus on what's important, a singular focus on making sure, and this is the bottom line for me, making sure that there is high quality instruction and high level learning happening for every student in every classroom, in every school, every day. I just think that's the work that we do. The classroom is where the magic happens, and we need to keep our focus there. Now, being a superintendent means there's 100 different things that you have to worry about at any one time. As you know, as board members, there are issues and concerns and challenges and just issues that need to be addressed that don't pertain to that focus on the classroom every day. Those things have to be addressed. Those things have to be dealt with. But you really have to keep your focus on what's important. And I've been there. I've been able to do that. And And so I would say experience as a superintendent, track record of success as a superintendent. And I also think I have a background and experience that is a particularly good fit for Polk County Public Schools. Strategic planning is something that I feel is a strength. Implementation of strategic planning is something I feel is a strength. Instructional leadership is something I feel is a strength. And I feel like at this moment in time, the Polk County Public Schools has just this wonderful foundation that y'all have built. You have made great progress over the last several years, and I feel like I could, as a leader, come in, work with the Board of Education, work with our teachers, work with our leaders, work with our stakeholders to build on that really strong foundation, to sustain that progress, and hopefully even accelerate that progress and ensure that students have a bright future here in this community.
Thank you so much. Next, we will have Mrs. Fields asking questions related to board and community relations.
Outstanding.
Mrs. Fields?
Thank you. Dr. McIntyre, when a new superintendent is hired, the goal is to make the transition as smoothly as possible for everyone. How would you help both the educational community and the community at large adjust to the new governance style that would come with a new superintendent? If I need to repeat that, I can.
No, that's okay. Thank you, Mrs. Fields. I think that for me, in this particular context, at this particular moment, part of how to make the transition is to take the time to make the transition. I mentioned there's a lot to be done, and certainly we need to recover from the pandemic and get back to the normal, as I say, routines and rhythms of schooling in the fall. But I also understand and believe that Polk County Public Schools is not in crisis. Polk County Public Schools is in a really good place with a solid foundation, making great progress. And so as a superintendent, I wouldn't need to come in here and change everything on day one. I don't need to come in here and, say, okay, this is the way we're going to do things now. I think the luxury that we have at this moment in time is for the new superintendent to come in and say, okay, what is working? What is working well? Let me more deeply understand the context of public education here in Polk County. Let me more deeply understand the players, who are the leaders in the district, who are the key stakeholders in the district, what are the, as I said before, the interests and the aspirations of our teachers, our parents, our stakeholders, and to take the time to really deeply understand what is happening in the Polk County Public Schools and what needs to happen in the Polk County Public Schools. And then when we can come to consensus together as a community about what our future looks like, we can then begin to make whatever changes need to be made in order to make that happen. But I think honestly, in this particular context, the beauty of this moment is that we don't have to make major changes right now. This is not a district in crisis. And so we have the luxury of taking the time to really make a smooth transition, to get to know each other as we get into the work, and to really more deeply understand what needs to occur before we implement any major changes.
Thank you. Very good answer.
Thank you.
In your role as superintendent, how would you ensure all stakeholder groups are fully engaged with schools? Why is diversity important to you, and how do you ensure it?
Thank you. I think diversity is incredibly important in its own right as a value, and it's a personal and professional value that I really embrace and espouse, diversity and equity and inclusion. And I also think it is part of how we provide an outstanding education for every child, is that part of how we learn is coming in contact with and negotiating and navigating difference, right? It's part of how we learn and grow and develop. And so diversity is a rich and important strength in Polk County Public Schools and in any educational organization. And so it's something that I embrace, and I think I try to do that in a variety of different ways. I do think part of my leadership style is to try to listen and to bring in a variety of voices and perspectives to any decision that's made. And I think engaging people in conversations about education is an important way to ensure that we are honoring all different perspectives, that we're honoring all different types of voices. But I also think we have to be really purposeful about the question of diversity, of making sure that our leadership and our teaching ranks and our staff reflects the rich diversity of our student population. And I have a track record and some experience in doing that. In the Knox County schools, about 25% of our population were students of color. But I found when I started as superintendent, only about 4 or 5% of our teaching ranks and only about 4 or 5% of our leadership ranks were individuals of color. And so we really wanted to be very purposeful about making some inroads to diversifying our leadership and our instructional staff and our non-instructional staff. And so part of what we did was we partnered with the University of Tennessee to create a principal pipeline program. It's actually the one I run now at the University of Tennessee. And to make that very purposefully about growing the next generation of great school leadership, but also making sure that that was a diverse pipeline. And so over time, we saw tremendous gains in terms of our diversity of our leadership ranks in particular. And our theory of action was that if we diversify our administrative ranks, our school leadership ranks, we'd actually see an increase in diversity in our teacher ranks. And the research sort of bears that out, but also our experience bared that out. And so over time, we didn't get to exactly where we wanted to, but we made tremendous progress. We got to about 16, 17% of our administrators then being individuals of color. And at one point in time, the Leadership Academy, our principal preparation program, actually had educated and prepared about 75% of all of the principals of color in the Knox County schools. So I was really proud of that really purposeful effort to partnership with the University of Tennessee and with the philanthropic community to create this pipeline of diversity and also of great leadership going forward. So I think, purposefully engaging a variety of voices is important. And I also think being intentional about ensuring that our teaching ranks and our leadership ranks really do reflect the rich diversity of our student population is important.
Thank you. I think you've indirectly already answered this question, but I'll present it again in a different context. Describe what you believe to be the ideal working relationship with the school board. And when you have an adversarial situation with a school board member, how would you resolve it?
Very good. Well, thank you, Ms. Fields. I believe, the most important professional relationship that the superintendent has is with the board, with the individual board members and with the board as a whole. This is together sort of the governance team of the school system, and I think it's important to really develop those relationships. I really appreciate and respect the role that you all play as school board members, as representatives of your constituency, but also leaders in your community. And that's sometimes a difficult balance between representing and leading. And I just really appreciate that. I recognize that being a school board member is a somewhat thankless job, right? It's a challenge. There are difficult issues to grapple with, but there probably aren't a whole lot of people signing up for public comment just to comment and say, hey, y'all are doing a great job. I'm really satisfied with your leadership and the votes you've taken. Thank you, right? There's probably not a whole lot of that. But I really appreciate the role that you have. I would say that it's important to be really clear about roles and responsibilities between the board and the superintendent. That making that distinction, making that delineation is going to be incredibly important. In fact, as superintendent in Knoxville, we work with our board to actually, spend a whole retreat or two talking about what's the role of the board, what's the role of the superintendent, how do we communicate together, what does it look like if we have a complaint from a constituent, what does it look like if in terms of our relationship with principals or with staff members. And the school board actually reduced that to writing and then adopted that as policy so that we were really clear about what the roles and responsibilities were for school board versus superintendent versus staff. And I thought that was really powerful and important and helpful in navigating those relationships and making sure that we all were really clear about what the expectations were and where we needed to go. And then I think it's also incredibly important not just to have a relationship with the board as a whole, but to have a relationship with the individual members of the board as well, to understand how, why you're on the board, to understand where you're coming from, to understand what your priorities and interests are, to understand how you like to be communicated with, to understand all of that, so that we can have a really good working relationship together. And in terms of conflict, I think why that's important to have that relationship is because we're all here for the same reason, I believe. We're all here because we care about kids. We're all here because we care about quality education, and we want our kids to have the opportunity for a really successful future. And so I go back to that. I go back to that grounding in what we do. And I'll just give you a quick example. Probably a quick story. I know we've got a couple hours, so we can talk about these things. Early on in my tenure as superintendent, I brought charges to revoke tenure and to terminate a teacher, and for inefficiency and ineffectiveness, and just wasn't, even with support, wasn't doing a very good job as a teacher. And that teacher decided, instead of to be terminated, to resign, and then decided to run for school board, and won that election. And then a couple years later was the chairman of the school board, and I had to work very directly with that individual. And I remember that first agenda setting meeting when it was just he and I, and we walked in together and sort of looked at each other and sized each other up. But what happened was we actually worked really well together. We were able to put aside that sort of fraught professional, personal history and focus on what was important for kids. We were able to really focus on the work for children. It was at his core, it was at my core of why we did the work that we wanted to do for children. And so I think finding that common purpose, finding that common ground, making sure that we all harken back to what our home base is, which is making sure that we're doing the right thing for children and providing children with a great education, is a great way to overcome and navigate through some of that conflict. And we might have different perspectives, we might bring different experiences, but we're all here for the same reason. And so I think being able to develop those personal relationships and understand where people are coming from is going to be helpful in working through some of those challenges.
And a follow-up I have on that is, what if you get in a place where you aren't able to come to an agreement? How do you handle that?
Well, I think we do the best that we can to do that. And I think, as superintendent, my job is to manage the day-to-day operations of the school system, but to also implement policy that the board puts in place. So if a majority of the school board votes to say this is what we're going to do, this is what we're going to do, and that's therefore my job to do it. So even if I might have a little bit of a difference in perspective on what that looks like, if that's with the will of the board, that's what we're going to do. And so, I think I will do as superintendent, give you the respect of always telling you what I think and what I believe, and not telling you what I think you want to hear. But if after having done that, after having made my best recommendation, after having, given you my best thinking, if you as a board decide to go in a different direction, then we go in a different direction. That's your prerogative. You're elected by the people to do that, and we'd move in that direction. So, again, I think the relationship with the board and the relationship with the individual board members is incredibly important, and I hope that there wouldn't be necessarily a conflict that we couldn't overcome, that we couldn't work through, that we couldn't get to the bottom of, to say, hey, we all want the same thing here. Let's figure out the best way to do it.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Do I have more time? You have about 2 more minutes, yep. All right, my last question.
Mm-hmm.
And you're doing very good.
Thank you. That's
You're
good
welcome.
to have some formative feedback. Thank you. I appreciate that.
How would you build an open, trusting relationship with your school board as an entity and each member individually? I think you've already answered that, but you can add to if you'd like.
Sure, absolutely. I think one of the things I really like to do is, again, get to know board members. But one of the ways to do that is, I feel like, is to do school visits together. So what I did in Knoxville was I would, at least once a year, schedule time with board members for us to do school visits together. And I love doing school visits. I did over 600 school visits my 8 years as superintendent in Knoxville. I love to be in the classroom. I love to see what's happening. I love to talk with teachers, to see instruction, and to just hear what's happening. I think that's the best way to sort of keep your ear to the ground and the pulse on what's going on in the classroom. But I think that opportunity to be in a school with a school board member, for us to see the same things, for us to talk about instruction and what we observed in the classroom, for us to hear from the principal together what their challenges are and what their strengths are and what's going well and what isn't, is a really great way to build relationship and build trust and to build common ground around what the agenda should be for the district and for continuing to improve the quality of education that we provide our students.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Fields. And next, we will have Dr. Allen asking questions related to student accountability.
Great.
Dr. Allen?
All right. So as it relates to student accountability, based on what you know about our current system, what do you view is the greatest potential for improvement? And you allude to some of those successes and what, we're not being in a crisis, so I really appreciate that perspective. But then, what are the greatest opportunities that you see as well?
Great. Well, thank you. I think this is an important part of the conversation going forward in terms of where do we want to go as a school system? What do we want to focus on? And what I see in Polk County Public Schools is, as I mentioned, a tremendous foundation, really strong progress over the last several years. But also part of what I like about the opportunity here is there is still some work to do. There is still some progress to be made. And I guess I would point to the district as a whole, to start there, going from an overall rating of a C to a B, I think is tremendous and shows great progress for the district as a whole. But then I also see room to grow. I think just based on the Florida rankings, as best I understand them, Polk County is about 53rd out of 67 in that index that leads to that overall grade. High school graduation rate has seen increases over the last several years. I believe you're up to 86.5% graduation rate, which is up from about 80% 2 years ago, which is tremendous progress and tremendous growth. And I think that's wonderful. You see really some extraordinary leaps in high school graduation rate in terms of students with disabilities and English language learners and African American students, all of whom are posting close to double-digit or more increases in high school graduation rate over the last couple of years, which I think is fabulous. But there are still some gaps. There are still some gaps in that graduation rate between white students, Hispanic students, African American students, students with disabilities. Those gaps are closing, and that's to the credit of the school system. But there's still some work to do there in terms of bringing all of our students to a really high rate of high school graduation. Again, good news story. There are more A's and B schools than there were. The last time that those designations were made. So in 2019, I think there were several more A schools and several more B schools, but there were also several more D schools in Polk County Public Schools. So there were fewer C's, and some of those went to A's and B's, but also some of them went to D's. And so again, really good news story, but also some additional work to be done with regard to some of those schools. And again, the number of TSI schools is down by 18, but the number of CSI schools is up by 16. So a little bit of a dichotomy there, just because there's some great work happening and great progress, but also some continued work to do. And I guess if I were to focus on, where do we want to go from there? What do we want to focus on? I think, for me, again, it goes back to making sure we have great instruction happening in every classroom every single day. And I believe strongly in teacher leadership and teacher collaboration and a developmental evaluation system to help get us there and ensure that we're seeing that great instruction. I believe strongly in having a very strong foundation in literacy and making sure that every elementary teacher is a strong teacher of reading, and that's a complex, really complex skill to teach and a really complex undertaking to teach it. And then I really like the perspective that you all take around thinking about multiple pathways to success. I love the academy structure. I love the opportunities that you've provided, and I think really continuing in that vein would be important. And then as I look, I'm sorry, this is probably more than you asked for, but as I look at the state report card and where are we in terms of the multiple elements of that grading system that gets us to a B, I see middle school acceleration as a particular opportunity. I think when I look at Hillsborough and Orange counties and other places that are nearby, and that really should be our peer districts. I mean, Polk County should aspire to be an A district, and I think y'all do, and I think should be one of the best school districts in the state. But when I look at a couple of those peer districts, I see middle school acceleration as a particular area of opportunity for Polk County Public Schools. So those are a couple of areas I might think about focusing on.
Good. And, definitely all this data is so good. So I appreciate your pulse on our district. So with this in mind, just sort of following up with that, how have you held staff members accountable for student achievement while balancing the demands put on the teachers? So and maybe unpack that developmental component that you talked about there.
Yeah, I would like to, and also I'd love to just sort of tell you a little bit. You've heard about some of the successes that we had in Knox County schools in terms of student learning outcomes. I think it's probably important also to understand a little bit of the trajectory that we experienced in Tennessee around educational improvement and what that looks like. So just to give you a sense of that, what we saw in Tennessee, I think Tennessee got tired of being 46th, 47th, 48th in the nation in education on a variety of measures, and really put in place some significant changes to public education in the 2000s. Radically higher academic standards, a new teacher evaluation system, a new assessment system, requirement for differentiated compensation, radically changed how tenure was earned for teachers, and changed from collective bargaining to something called collaborative conferencing. All of those are huge, seismic changes in public education, and we don't really like change that much in public education, right? We like things to remain the same, and so all of those were huge changes in public education at the time, all put in place for the right reasons, all put in place to try to really get to an even better education for our students, and ultimately that's what occurred. But at a point in time, it really led to a lot of uncertainty and anxiety among teachers in Tennessee, and in particular certainly in Knox County schools as well. And I just remember, that feeling of uncertainty and anxiety. I remember one particular time, as I mentioned, I love to do school visits, I love to be in classrooms, I love to go to faculty meetings. And after one of the faculty meetings, a teacher came up to me and she was visibly worried and nervous. And I knew she was a great teacher. I'd been in her classroom, I had seen her teach, she was fabulous, she was incredible. But all this change had her rattled and had her feeling like maybe she wasn't a good teacher anymore. And I knew that to not be the case. And even in the conversation, it became clear she was worried about her job. She thought she was going to get fired. And she was a great teacher. And I said, boy, we need to do something I need to do something about this. This is not acceptable. And we really need to address these challenges for our teachers. And so I went back and about 2 weeks later, and maybe it was overkill, but I presented to our board an 11-point plan for teacher support, and to try to really make sure that our teachers had the tools, the resources, and the support that they needed to meet these really high standards that we had put in place in the state of Tennessee. And I think, Dr. Allen, that's when we really started to see incredible progress for students in our school system. When we didn't compromise on the standards and the rigorous expectations that we had in place, but we brought the support and the tools and the resources our teachers needed to be able to do that job and to meet that high bar, and for our students to be able to do so as well. That's when we became an exemplary school district. That's when we really hit it out of the park in terms of student support and student academic success. And so I would say in terms of accountability, I think accountability is important. I think it's important to be really clear about expectations. I think it's important not to compromise on high standards and expectations. But I also think it's important that we provide people with the support and the tools and build the capacity for them to be able to meet those high standards. And so I guess part of what I believe and have learned as an educational leader is that for every teaspoon of accountability, you got to bring a gallon of support and help people get there and help people to get back to a place where they really feel where they are being successful for kids and they really feel like they're being successful for kids. And I think over time, the vast majority of our teachers got there. They got comfortable with all of the change. They got comfortable with the high bar that we had set. And they felt comfortable and honestly felt proud of the work that they had done for children in meeting that higher bar. So I'm proud of that transition. I think, we hit a couple of rough patches in there during that time of great change, but I also feel good about where we got to and the fact that we became an exemplary school district because our teachers really got there and because of the support we were able to provide for them to be able to provide our kids with a great education.
Good. Yeah, so, I hear that high accountability with, high standards, that base of support. So maybe this question can, pull another perspective on that too. So what measures, have you used outside of test scores, if needed, to measure student achievement, and why do you use these alternative measures?
Yeah, I think it's important to take a multiple measures approach. I think it's important to look certainly at, the traditional indicators of student achievement and growth, but I also think it's important to look at additional indicators. I think it's important to look at formative assessment, which can be anything from, a very formalized assessment that our teachers use in the classroom to teachers asking questions and seeking, to see if there's understanding among their students. So really getting a sense from our teachers about what their formative assessments look like. I think it's important for us to think about indicators of rigor. So how many of our students are involved in advanced placement courses or IB courses or Cambridge courses? How many of our students are engaged in what we call in Tennessee early post-secondary opportunities, right? Dual enrollment and dual credit and things of that nature. I think there's also questions of, how do we measure some of the soft skills that are so important to our students today? How do you really think about problem solving and critical thinking, and how do you look at collaboration and communication as an indicator of success for our students? Because I think those are critically important for our kids to be able to be successful in today's world and tomorrow's world. And so I think looking at this from a variety of perspectives is going to be really important. And I also think asking our students is really important about their perspectives and what they think. I'll tell you another quick story. Again, I love to visit classrooms. I love to be in schools. And one day I was in a school in one of our inner city, high poverty elementary schools. And I went into a classroom, I observed for a little while, and then I went over and, as I like to do, knelt down next to one of our students and introduced myself. And I said, "Hey, I'm Jim," and shook his hand. He said, "Hello, my name is Jonah." And he was working on a worksheet, and I said, "Jonah, what is it you're doing?" And he said, he had to read a paragraph and answer some questions and things like that, and he told me. And I said, "Okay, great, well, go ahead, and I don't want to interrupt you, keep going ahead." And so he kept reading, and then he kept answering some questions, and I saw that he was doing great and, answering the questions correctly and doing some great work. And so I said, "Jonah, it looks like you're doing great work. Keep up the hard work. You'll do wonderful things in life. And it's great to meet you. And thanks for the opportunity to interrupt you and talk with you for a minute." And I waved and I got up and he pulled on the back of my suit coat like this and he said, "Hey, Jim." And so he said, "Hey, Jim." And I said, "Yeah, Jonah, what is it?" He says, "Can I show you how I know that? Can I show you how I know the answer to that question that I just answered?" And I smiled, and I said, "Yes, Jonah, you can, please do." And Jonah showed me that he had seen in the paragraph above, what led him to the answer that he showed. So that skill of using text evidence to answer a question, and for a third grader in one of our inner city elementary schools, someone who, a young person who not only knew that was something he's supposed to do, but was really proud of the fact that he had done it and wanted to show me, told me we were on the right track and we were making progress and we were moving in good direction. So So, Jonah had a really complex skill set that we were teaching him and building his capacity. And I just remember that story because the students will also be a good indicator of how you're doing and if you're moving in a good direction and if you're making progress. And students will tell you, right? Students will tell you if you go up sometimes you say, hey, what are you working on? I have no idea, right? I don't know. I don't know what it is. But students like Jonah reassure you that you're moving in a positive direction and getting to a good place.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for sharing that. I think I have time for one more question, or yeah, definitely. Okay, so
I'm really good at short answers, as you can tell.
So high stakes, testing. This is a big conversation. It's both praised and vilified. What are your thoughts on that conversation, just briefly?
I think that assessment in a variety of forms is an important part of the teaching and learning process. I think that for our teachers to be able to provide good instruction, they have to know where our kids are at. They have to know what our students know and what our students can do and where the gaps are. And so while I think you have to be careful and make sure that there's not over-testing and make sure that there's not an overemphasis particularly on standardized assessments, I think that being able to know where our students at is an incredibly important part of the work that we do so that we can do a better job of personalizing instruction for our kids and making sure that we are doing the work that we need to do to set them up for future success. So I think that there's a need to have assessments. I think we have to be thoughtful and careful about how we utilize that information and that data. But I think there's a place for assessment in the teaching and learning process.
Great, thank you.
It was actually a short answer for once. That's it.
Appreciate it, Dr. McIntyre.
Thank you, Dr. Allen. Next, we will have Mrs. Miller asking questions related to operations management. Ms. Miller?
Morning, Dr. McIntyre.
Good morning.
I have 5, so we'll go through them.
Okay, great.
Hopefully. It's okay, I talk a lot too, so I appreciate your answers. For smooth operations across divisions, it is important to build a leadership pipeline. Please discuss your approach to ensuring qualified leadership in all areas of the organization, including the district administration.
Very good. Well, thank you for the question, and I agree. I think that's incredibly important to build capacity of people in our organization. And I think as a learning organization, as a school system, that's part of what we should be doing every single day. Part of my role at the University of Tennessee, as I've mentioned, is developing and supporting school leaders and district leaders. And I think that's incredibly important work and something that we need to continue to focus on. And I think we have to, as I've mentioned about a few other things, I think we have to be intentional and purposeful about that as well. And I think that we have to create structures and protocols and make investments in terms of building leadership and building capacity. So I think about it from a couple of perspectives. I think instructional leadership, I think of all of our teachers as instructional leaders. I think of all of our classroom teachers as folks who are not only providing instruction to our students, but are collaborating with their peers and oftentimes providing instructional strategies to their peers and supporting others who are doing this work as well. And I think building a culture that values that teacher leadership and teacher collaboration, I think is an important part of success. I really do think developmental evaluation is an important part of the work that we do to build capacity as well. And I say developmental because I don't think evaluation necessarily really, I don't think evaluation should be punitive. I think it should really focus on building capacity and helping people do their jobs more effectively. And so I think that's an important part of the development of leaders in the district and educators in the district. And then you mentioned district leadership as well, and I think it's important to think about succession planning as much as we don't like to think that we are replaceable, that we might ever leave, that we need to make sure that the next generation of educators and the next generation of leaders are being developed and built as we're doing this important work. And so giving opportunities for people, pushing people to stretch a little bit in their leadership, I think is really important. And I think identifying potential future talent and cultivating that is an important part of what we do. I'll give myself this moment of personal privilege to say how excited I am that Dr. Nakia Towns is a candidate for this position. Dr. Towns, I hired Dr. Towns in the Knox County Schools about a decade ago, and hopefully provided her with opportunities and helped build capacity to where she is today. And she's obviously a very smart and capable person, but I think that we want for the people who work for us and the people who work with us to continue to grow and develop and lead and be prepared for that next step. And I think she's a great example of what that looks like.
Thank you. Yes, that's great testimony to where she's been. Appreciate that. The next question comes down to employees. Besides salary increases, what rewards can you offer employees that would help them feel respected, valued, and needed?
I think one of the most important things that we can do for our staff, and particularly our teachers, is to treat them like professionals. Yes, there are standards that we need to teach, and yes, there is a curriculum that frames some of that work, but our teachers bring energy and creativity and personality and knowledge and expertise to the job, and I think we have to acknowledge that and value that and embrace that. And so I think treating our educators and our staff as professionals is something that I think is incredibly important for to show them that they matter, to show them that they are important, to show them that the work that they do is critical. And so I think that aspect of the work is incredibly important. And I think also there's opportunities for what I like to think of as earned autonomy as well. That if a leader or a staff member or an educator is doing a fabulous job, that they get a little more latitude, a little more ability to be entrepreneurial, to be innovative, to have room to maybe do something a little bit different, and to really show that we value the work that they do. I also think it sort of goes back to what I said earlier, I think, with regard to the board. I think giving our staff and our employees and our teachers the respect of telling them the truth and telling them, setting clear expectations and clear parameters about what we expect, and then holding them to those high standards is something that I think we need to do. And I see that as a sign of respect, that we know you can meet this high bar. We know that you can provide this level of excellence to our students. And so we're going to expect that, and we're going to circle back with you and talk with you about it. If you are, we're going to celebrate that. And if you're not, we're going to talk about that as well. So I think treating our teachers and our staff as professionals, and also being clear about expectations and about setting the bar really high is an important part of how we build that capacity and acknowledge the great value that they bring.
Thank you. The next question is, what is the ideal communication process between the superintendent's office and employees at school sites and departments throughout your district?
So the one thing I think I've found as a superintendent is that you can never communicate enough. That you can say it, and you can think you've said it, but not everyone's heard it unless you say it again and again, and find multiple strategies and multiple media in order to be able to do that. So I think different people consume information in different ways, and so it's important to try to provide information in a variety of different ways. Be that social media, be that on a website, be that via email, be that via a robocall, be that via being in traditional print or television media. I think all of those communication vehicles are incredibly important because we want to send a unified message. We want to communicate effectively to all constituencies, and different people consume information in different ways. I think also the other thing that I think is important to acknowledge is that a lot of people get their information from other people, not from the district, right? Not from the people who are in the leadership or in elected officials like board members, but they get it from someone they see in the grocery store, or they get it from a teacher who's talking about it at the ball field or whatever it might be. And so I think providing our teachers, our staff, our employees with good information that they can share, that they then can communicate to others, is one of the key levers of communication that we actually have available to us. And the last thing I would say, because I know, again, I'm conscious of not going too long here, but the other thing I would say about an ideal communication strategy is that it's two-way, right? That it's not just the board and the superintendent communicating out to employees and teachers and staff and parents and students, but that we're also creating avenues and venues and opportunities for our students, our parents, our teachers, our staff, our constituencies to be able to provide information to us and to provide feedback to us and input to us on the decisions that we're making, so that it's a real genuine and authentic two-way communication.
Thank you. The next question is, what is your experience in leading a facilities renovation and building program in a fast-growing district?
So I have a couple of experiences here that I think are relevant. I was the chief operating officer for the Boston Public Schools, and so oversaw all of the non-academic elements of the school system, including facilities and maintenance, and also the capital building program. And so we weren't a fast-growing district, but we had been in business since 1635, and so we had some we had some aging facilities, to say the least. And so we had an aggressive building program to do both renovations and on a limited basis, some new construction. And in Knox County Schools in Knoxville, we also had some enrollment growth, but also more just a program to ensure that we had a safe, healthy, inviting learning environment. And that was what our goal was around our facilities. And so we had the opportunity to do many renovations and also some new construction of schools. And so working with our facilities folks, working with our finance folks around how to fund those schools, and then making sure that we really heard from our constituencies, our families, or those who are going to be the consumers of those schools, so that we built facilities that met their needs was really important. I think about one time we built a new elementary school. It's called North Shore Elementary School, and we had, as we always did with any major decision, we had lots of community forums and discussions and meetings. And one of the things we shared a potential, sort of draft architectural drawing, a preliminary architectural drawing. And one of the things we heard from the neighborhood was, we don't like where you put the entrance to the school because it's in this sort of subdivision type of community, and there's going to be a lot of congestion. And so could you think about putting it somewhere else? Could you think about rotating the school 180 degrees so that the entrance is in the back and the back is in the front? And we were sort of taken aback by that a little bit, but then said, sure, yeah, as long as we can make it work architecturally and from a foundation perspective and all that, yeah, let's do it. And so we did. We rotated the school 180 degrees and built it with the entrance further away from the neighborhood. And so I think it's important to just listen and to learn and to hear good feedback, and not just as an exercise of, to say, okay, we had the community forums, we checked the box, but to really listen and then to respond to those types of concerns and to those types of things. And honestly, I think it made it better. I think it was a better decision. I think moving the entrance made it more accessible and more welcoming, and so it was a good decision that had been suggested by the neighbors.
Thank you. The last question I have is, describe your ability to cultivate a disciplined, safe, and orderly school environment.
Mm-hmm. I think this is very important today more than ever before. And, we've seen, certainly here in Florida and across the country, safety and security issues that have been tragic and challenging over time. And so I think this is really important. I think safety of our students and the security of our school buildings is incredibly important in its own right, but also as a prerequisite to learning. It has to be a safe, comfortable learning environment for students if they're going to learn and be successful. So we made substantial investments in, after the Sandy Hook tragedy in Knoxville, towards student safety and school security that I think were important and valuable. So we focused on a couple of different areas, including physical tools. So camera buzzer systems to, I think many of us lament the day that we had to lock the doors of school buildings, but we've had to lock the doors of school buildings. And so camera buzzer systems to allow people to enter at the front door, video monitoring systems in schools, keyless card entry systems and fencing, so physical tools of that nature. We also made a major investment in partnership with our law enforcement partners in Knoxville, which included the Knoxville Police Department and the Knox County Sheriff's Office, to put an armed, uniformed, trained officer in each of our schools, all 90. And oftentimes it was multiple officers. And by some combination of school resource officers and school security officers, we were able to accomplish that goal. And then also, and I think this goes to part of your point as well, we really saw students as a critical part of their own safety. We saw a student developing relationships with students so that they felt comfortable telling an adult if they felt unsafe or if there was something going on in the school, that they could talk to an adult about that as an important part of the safety. We developed an anonymous text tip line for our students to be able to provide information. And I think having students be an important part of the safety of the school is incredibly important also. And you mentioned discipline as well. And I would say, I think this is really important, that we saw, and I think this is critical, that the role of the school resource officer, the role of police or security officers in the school is really about safety. It's really about if there's a law being broken or if there's a safety issue in the school, it's not about discipline. School resource officers and school safety officers don't really need to be involved in what are just regular traditional discipline unless there's been a law that's been broken, unless there's been, and their role is really around law enforcement and around safety. So I think that distinction is important because there's a lot of conversation, about if you have law enforcement in the schools, does it lead to a school to prison pipeline, and are there concerns about those types of things? But I think if you can make that distinction really clearly and make sure that the officers are really well trained about what their role is and what their role isn't, and that they know to develop relationships with students and to be a key law enforcement and security and safety presence, but not necessarily a disciplinary presence. I think that's an important distinction to make.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Mrs. Miller. And next, we will have Ms. Fortney asking questions related to instructional leadership.
Wonderful.
Ms. Fortney?
Thank you. What are the most important current issues facing school-level administrators? What is the district's role in addressing these issues? And how did you influence school culture as a principal or district-level administrator?
Great. Thank you for the multiple part question.
I had to cut it down.
I appreciate that. I think, well, obviously in the current moment, the pandemic has sort of become top of mind in most regards. And I think right now the question is, how do we make sure that we're providing high quality instruction, high quality education to all of our students who are facing some unprecedented challenges? How do we make sure we support our teachers who are also facing unprecedented challenges in doing the work that they're doing? I know that y'all recently, I watched your impasse hearing, and I know you did a stipend for teachers who are teaching students both remotely and in person, and that's such a huge challenge for our teachers to be able to, provide high quality instruction in two different mediums at the same time. And but it's what our teachers are grappling with. It's the work that they're doing. So I think right now it's always about how do we make sure we provide a great education to our kids? How do we make sure that we have a high level of instruction and high level learning happening in our classrooms? But right now there are added challenges to that, and I think that's probably the most important issue that our building level folks are grappling with right now. But I think in normal times, that question is also a key question. How do we support our teachers? How do we ensure that we're building a culture in our school that supports great instruction, that supports high-level learning, and that enables our students to be successful? I think because of the pandemic, but also before the pandemic, issues of student mental health and student social emotional wellness are top of mind and critical, and I think issues of equity are incredibly important right now as well. They always have been, but I know the pandemic has also exacerbated some of the inequities that we've historically seen in public education. So I think those COVID-related challenges, and then they're not even necessarily COVID-related, but they've been surfaced and amplified by the pandemic, are probably part of what's top of mind for school administrators right now. And I think the second part of your question was about what kind of a culture do you want to create in public education? And I would go back to the story I think I told earlier about the trajectory of the Knox County schools and what that looked like. And I think those dual perspectives of high expectations and high standards and setting the bar at excellence, but also helping people, supporting our educators to be able to meet that high bar is, I think, the type of culture that I want to see in our public school systems. We want to make sure that we're giving our students every opportunity to learn and be successful, and that we're doing everything in our power to provide outstanding instruction to be able to do that. And I think that is the culture that I want to see, a student-centered culture, a culture that is focused on student success and student achievement and student learning, but then also really attends to the needs of those who are doing that work, the adults in the building, the teachers in the building who are doing that important work. So that's the kind of culture I think I would want to build and support, is one that's student-centered, but also supportive of the adults who are doing the work.
Detail what you have done in the past and what you would do to facilitate reading proficiency among students with learning disabilities, ELL, and economically disadvantaged students.
Very good. I think this is an incredibly important issue. I think I mentioned it earlier, that literacy has to be one of our top priorities in making sure that all of our students are effective readers by third grade, if not before. And I just feel that one of the ways to do that is to ensure that all of our elementary teachers are effective teachers of reading. And as I said before, this is an incredibly complex skill to make meaning of the written word. I don't think we give it enough credence in terms of its complexity and the challenge of teaching reading. But I also know, and we know a lot about the science of literacy and the science of reading and what that means in terms of both having phonics and phonemic awareness and fluency and comprehension and vocabulary, and bringing all of those elements of literacy together. But I don't know that all of our elementary teachers come out of their educator preparation programs prepared to be a really effective teacher of reading. And so I think it's incumbent upon us to make that happen. One of the things that we did when I was the superintendent of the Knox County Schools is we partnered with the state of Tennessee around the Tennessee Department of Education offered a year-long reading course that was essentially giving elementary school teachers that really deep grounding in the science and the strategies that are research-based in teaching reading. And so we encouraged our teachers to do that. We hired the substitutes that were necessary when they left their classroom in order to do that on a regular basis. And I think that made a huge difference in our ability to provide high-quality literacy instruction in our school systems. And many of those teachers came back and said, it was one of the best things I've ever done in my career. And now I really deeply understand the technical aspects and the research-based aspects and the complexity around teaching reading in ways that I didn't before. And I feel much more confident in my ability to do that. And then, you take those strategies and you take those educators who have had success in that and apply that to different contexts. Hopefully they can provide support to our students who are in exceptional education, our students who are English language learners, our students who are living in poverty, so that we can see all students be successful as readers.
Specifically, what role have you played in turning around underperforming schools? Give examples with data.
Sure. So when I certainly have had the experience of being involved and leading work around turning around schools. When I started as superintendent in Knoxville, a couple of our high poverty inner city schools were on the verge of state takeover, in particular one of our high schools. And we made a lot of effort to invest in those in schools. And invest not just financially, but we did invest financially, but also invest time, effort, energy, and the resources in order to bring those schools to where we knew they could be and where we knew they should be. And I would say this is a question when we talk about equity in public education. This is one of those times when we said, we're going to make additional investments. One of the things that we did was to bring a resource allocation model to our school system. And I know, Mr. Wilson, we're probably going to talk about finances later on, but we brought a resource allocation model that actually stratified the allocation of resources to schools based on the concentration of kids in poverty. So what that meant was that high school I just talked about in inner city Knoxville had about 2.5 times on a per pupil basis the funding that some of our more affluent suburban high schools had. Now that's a hard conversation to have in some of our more affluent suburban areas, but we made the argument, and I think it was persuasive, that every student, the success of every student in our schools was important and critical to the success of our community as a whole. And we framed that as an equity issue. And making those investments in our Austin Ace High School and Vine Middle Magnet School allowed us to turn those schools around to, they came off of the state takeover list, they came off of all of the accountability lists that you don't want to be on in the Knox County schools, and saw great gains. And just in terms of data, we had to, in order to be identified as an exemplary school district, we had to make progress in closing achievement gaps. And so basically in every subject area for all categories of students. And over a period of time, we saw those achievement gaps narrow, so much so that we were able to be identified and designated as an exemplary school district in the state of Tennessee. So I do have some, real on-the-ground experience in doing that. And I think the last thing I'll say about this is I think leadership matters in turning around schools. I think that if you put in place a great school leader, they're going to do all of the things that you need to happen in order to create a great school. They're going to build and retain and grow a great team of educators. They're going to use resources wisely. They're going to engage the community. They're going to focus on high quality instruction. They're going to have accountability conversations when it's necessary. And they're going to focus on the needs of students. So I think leadership and having excellent educators are going to be incredibly important ingredients in order to make sure that schools that are struggling are turned around.
What types of programs have you found to be the most effective in improving student learning? What makes them effective, and how do you evaluate that effectiveness? How do you communicate that to your stakeholders?
So more than any program that I have found effective, I think engaging and building the capacity of people has proven effective. In particular, engaging and improving the capacity of educators. So I'm, as I think I've probably mentioned a couple times, I'm a big proponent of making sure that our highest priority is ensuring that there's great instruction happening and high-level learning happening in every classroom. And I think there are specific ways to do that. I believe I've mentioned teacher leadership and teacher collaboration, but I'm also, a big proponent of developmental evaluation. And I know evaluation is scary and gets a lot, it sounds like it's going to be, it could be punitive and people will get worried about that. But when you think about developmental evaluation, what that means to me is you start with a definition of what good teaching looks like. You start with a research-based definition of good teaching, and then you go into classrooms, principals, assistant principals, instructional coaches, peer observers, go into classrooms, see what's happening in the classroom, and then I think this is the key, have a conversation with those educators about what they saw in the classroom, and have a conversation with the educator about what that teacher thought went well, thought could go better, and really compare what did we see in the classroom, how did that go in that lesson versus what did we expect and what would we like to see and what's best practice and what are some of the research-based instructional strategies that we want to see happening. I think that's an important part of success in any school system. I am convinced that part of how we got to being an exemplary school district in the Knox County schools is because we went from having a very weak evaluation system that didn't even require for veteran teachers a classroom visit to a place where we were having multiple observations and multiple conversations about instruction with every educator every year. So for our 4,500 classroom teachers, we were having some 10,000 conversations about instruction every year. We were talking about what was happening in the classrooms and talking about how we can continuously improve and get just a little bit better each day around the work we do with children. And so I think more than any other program, I think that focus on high quality instruction is what really makes a difference in terms of student learning and success.
Perfect. I think you already answered the other one anyways.
Thank you, Ms. Fortney.
Thank you, Ms. Fortney. Next, we will have Mr. Wilson asking questions related to business services. Mr. Wilson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, good afternoon.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
We're going to switch gears a little bit, talk about budget. The first question is, share with us your plans for the district's budget development process, and what level of involvement will principals, directors, and other administrators have in that process?
Very good. Well, thank you for the question. Thank you, Mr. Wilson. I think you know from my resume, I spent 8 years as the budget director for the Boston Public Schools, and that's probably the hardest job I've ever had. But I think it's important to, as the question suggests, to really involve a variety of constituencies in the budget development process. I think it's important to be clear about what the goal is and to be clear about what we're trying to accomplish educationally to start. But then I think it's important to involve a variety of constituencies. I do see the principals and some of our district level administrators as some of the key players in those conversations. I think principals should have a great deal of autonomy to live within state law and federal regulations and school board policies, but within that framework to be able to say, here's what works best for my school, for my kids, and here's how we're going to organize our resources to best support student learning and success in our school. So I would envision a process whereby there's a great deal of input. I would envision a process that is very open and transparent, and I would envision a process where there's a good deal of autonomy and flexibility within certain parameters for school communities to be able to develop a budget that works for them and for their kids.
Thank you, Dr. McIntyre. My next question is, what role do you see for the board in the development of the budget, and how will that process be facilitated?
Yeah, thank you. Again, I think another great question. I actually see the board as the starting point. I know a lot of times in budget development processes, the boards are the last step, right? A fully formed recommendation comes to the board and you sort of vote yay or nay and that sort of thing. I actually see the board as the starting point because I see the budget development process as a process of aligning our financial resources to our educational objectives. I see it as a process of starting with, what are we trying to accomplish educationally? What do we want to do for our children? How do we want to approach this work of public education in our community? And then let's talk about how to organize our resources and align our resources in order to accomplish that. So I see it as, we start with the educational and then go to the fiscal rather than the other way around. And so I think starting with a conversation about, what's our strategic vision for the school system? What's our strategic direction? What's our strategic plan? And then I think that gives the marching orders to the superintendent, to the administration, to the budget director, to the principals in order to say, okay, here's what we're trying to accomplish educationally. Now let's put some dollars and cents to it and figure out how to organize those resources in ways that are going to accomplish those educational objectives and goals going forward.
Very good, thank you. My next question is, how would you ensure that schools located in under-resourced areas receive the attention and resources that they need?
Yeah, again, I think this goes back to, seems to me, a question of equity. And equity for me is about making sure that every student and every school has the particular resources and support that they need in order to be successful. And that, I acknowledge that that may mean different levels of resources for schools that have different levels of need. And so I think we need to really identify as a community, as a school system, as a board of education, what level of investment are we going to make in our schools, and if there are schools that have greater need, if there are students that have greater need, how are we going to reflect the budget in order to make a greater investment in those areas? And again, that's a challenging conversation, right? You want to make sure that that doesn't feel like a zero-sum game, that that's a loss for someone or a gain for other constituencies, but that you acknowledge that success of all of our students is going to be important, and that for some of our students in certain circumstances, it's going to require additional investment in order to get to that same level of excellence that we expect for all of our kids. So I think it's important to have that conversation. I think it's important to have it transparently and to be open and clear about what choices we're making with our budget and how we're making those choices and how we're laying those out to the place where we define equity. And again, go back to my experience in Boston and in Knoxville. I think we tried to be really clear about what the allocation methodology was, and including how we weighted resources for schools or for students who are struggling, or for students in poverty, or for students with other characteristics that needed additional investment, and to be really upfront and clear about that, to the extent of publishing it in the board documents and on our website, so that everyone knew that up front. We can have the conversation about whether those are the right weights, whether those are the right formulas, whether those are the right investments, but let's be really clear about what we're doing and making sure that everyone understands the investments that we're making.
Okay, thank you. And my last question goes to transparency. You've already talked about that somewhat, but what is your vision for financial reporting, transparency, and maintaining the public trust of our financial affairs for our county?
Yeah. I think that maintaining the public trust is incredibly important. These are not our dollars. These are the taxpayers' dollars. These are public monies, and we need to demonstrate that we're a good investment, that we are using every dollar wisely and well to the betterment of the children in our community, and that we can demonstrate that we can show evidence of that. And that, I think transparency is important, prerequisite to making sure that we are able to do that, to build that trust, and to make sure that we show we are a good investment, that the taxpayers are getting a good return on their investment for the dollars they put in place. I think I mentioned in my video in Knoxville, we did an annual return on investment report, which was really a methodologically rigorous analysis of the money we were spending, the programs we were spending it on, the investments that we were making, and the outcomes that we were getting. And if there were times when we saw that we weren't getting to a place where the programs were, getting to the outcomes that we wanted, we'd reallocate resources to a more effective priority, to a higher priority. I saw the impasse hearing, and Ms. Miller suggested an efficiency audit. And I don't think that's a bad idea at all. I think that's a great idea, to really think about, are we, to bring in another set of eyes, to take a look at, are we really spending our dollars wisely and well and efficiently and effectively? And can we demonstrate that to our community? Because I think before we ask for additional resources, before we say we need more money, before we need, we say to Tallahassee or other places we need additional dollars, I think we have to be able to demonstrate we're using the dollars we have wisely and well and effectively. And Mr. Wilson, you know this, we like to say in school finance that, you've got an all funds budget somewhere around $1.9 billion. So despite the fact that we have limited resources and unlimited aspirations, we've got a lot of money. And so we can do anything we want in education. We just can't do everything we want in education, and we have to choose. We have to make decisions. We have to prioritize, and we have to make trade-offs. And I think we have to have a conversation with our community about those decisions that we're making and make sure that they are the best ones possible. And before we move off finance, I do just want to say one more thing, which is that I've got a chance to look at some of the dynamics around the state of Florida with regard to education funding. And I actually agree with you, Mr. Wilson, about the challenge of the millage rollbacks, that when we see the millage rate go from, it's $5.93.5 right now, but it was $6.25 2 years ago. And if you had just stayed at that same rate, there'd be a lot more, it wouldn't be a tax increase, it'd be the same rate. If you just stayed at that rate, there'd be a lot more resources available to public education. And that's how, in many states, public school districts keep up with inflation and keep up with the demands of this really important work that we do for children in our state. And so I think that perspective of just not rolling it back so much could give us some of the resources that we could sort of use in making greater investments in Polk County Public Schools.
Well, I think so.
Well, we're in violent agreement then. That's good.
Thank you, Dr. McIntyre.
My pleasure. Thank you, Mr. Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. And next, we will have Ms. Reynolds asking questions related to personal leadership. Ms. Reynolds?
Thank you. And we may need you to testify to our legislators about the rollback rates and your opinions on them. So first to start, you talked a little bit about school resource officers and school security officers earlier regarding one of Ms. Miller's questions. What is the ideal relationship between law enforcement agencies and the school district in ensuring safe schools? And if also you could tell me the difference between school resource officers and school security officers.
Sure. I think it's important to have a really strong partnership with law enforcement. I think that we have an obligation first and foremost to keep our kids safe and to keep the adults who work in our schools safe. And I have found that a really deep collaborative partnership with law enforcement is an incredibly important asset and value in doing that, both in the Boston Public Schools and in the Knox County Schools. When I left the Boston Public Schools, I laughed because they gave me a police citation, like a plaque, but it was a police citation for the partnership that we built with the Boston Police Department. And then in Knoxville, we had an extraordinary partnership with both the Knoxville Police Department and the Knox County Sheriff's Office. And I think the background investigation, I hope, showed that. Because I think you talked with both the chief and the sheriff, who I worked with very closely. I mean, the three of us as the heads of those organizations talked virtually daily. And that really, I think, trickles down within the organizations to the partnerships that happen at the school level, at the district level, at the level of sheriff's deputies and principals. And so I think setting the tone around that partnership is really important. And again, in today's world, we need to have the partnership of our law enforcement partners in this work. We need to have a safe, inviting learning environment for our kids, and that starts with safety. The difference between school resource officers and school security officers are like your guardians, I believe you call them in the state of Florida, and they were school district employees, but they were uniformed, they had a badge, they swore an oath, they carried a service weapon, and they worked hard to keep our kids safe every day. We got to a place where our school security officers were actually trained by our sheriff's department. And so they had law enforcement training, and then they were bonded by our sheriff's department as well. So they actually had the authority to make arrests on campus or during school events or on the way to and from school events. So they had additional powers and authorities that were granted by our sheriff under his authority, under the law in Tennessee, that we wouldn't have otherwise had if we hadn't had that really good working relationship. That just wouldn't have happened otherwise, and didn't happen in many places across the state of Tennessee. But because of that, we were able to forge that relationship. They were bonded by the sheriff's department.
Awesome, thank you. Please share your thinking about organizational culture in a school district of this size and any specifics relating to organizational culture in our county.
Sure. One of the things I've heard just time and again about organizational culture and here in the county, and I've only been here for a few minutes, but I've heard it over and over again, is about collaboration. I've heard people work together, people have the same goals, and people overcome tensions and conflict and issues in order to get to a good place for kids and for everyone in this community. That's really encouraging and really exciting, and something I love to hear, because I think that's, we can't do this work ourselves. We can't do it by ourselves. We need the support of higher education, the support of the business community, the support of our parents and other stakeholders, certainly the support of our educators and our staff to be able to do this work for our children. And so it's really encouraging to hear that that's sort of part of the philosophy and the ethos of this community, is to work together and collaborate together. And so I think that's a wonderful thing. And then I spoke a little bit about organizational culture internally. I think some of the key aspects of that, I think being student-centered, being student-focused. I did, as superintendent, I wrote down a series of expectations that I had for our principals and for our teachers and for our employees. But I also wrote down a set of commitments that I made to them as well. And both of those started with making decisions based on what's best for kids. That I expect you to do that. You can expect me to do that, and if you do that, I will always have your back. I will always support you, because that's the most important part of the work that we do. So I think having that organizational culture that is focused on student success and focused on our kids is incredibly important. But also, as I've mentioned, I have high expectations, and I think setting the bar high and striving for excellence is an important part of what we need to do as well. And making sure that we're clear about expectations in that regard, and making sure that people know that we celebrate when they meet those expectations, and we'll have a conversation if they don't meet those expectations. But we're all here to serve our children, and we're all here to provide not just a good education, but a truly outstanding education for every child.
Thank you. A superintendent handles a variety of responsibilities. Of them, which do you feel most qualified to handle, and why? And for which of the responsibilities of superintendent will you need additional support, and how do you plan to approach that area?
So I've some of the strengths that I feel like I bring, certainly working well with partners, working well with the Board of Education, developing those important relationships that are critical to being able to provide an excellent education for our kids, I think is a strength. It's something that I feel, again, hopefully you got a flavor of this through the background investigation, the letters of reference that you got from, I think 4 of my past board chairs when in Knoxville, hopefully got a sense of that ability to partner with people, to work collaboratively toward the benefit of children. I think another strength is really the ability to facilitate a conversation, not to dictate, but to facilitate a conversation around what's the strategic direction of the district and how do we fulfill that. to develop a comprehensive and detailed strategic plan to that really reflects the interests and the priorities of the community, that reflects the aspirations of the community around education, that really seeks to meet a really high bar. And then, not just to develop that plan and to have a lovely document, but to actually carry it out. And I really believe strongly that was part of our success in Knoxville, is that we had the opportunity to not only develop and implement a 5-year strategic plan, but then to do a second strategic plan, a successor strategic plan. And that was incredibly important. And we learned so many things, and we're able to integrate those into the next plan. In fact, the first plan was called Excellence for All Children. The next plan was called Excellence for Every Child. And that's a really subtle distinction between the two, but important because we really learned that personalizing instruction for every child, individualizing learning for every child was incredibly important. So that notion of strategic planning and development, but also implementation and having the discipline to keep focused on implementing the plan and keep focused on the work that's happening in the classroom, I think is a strength as well. And then I hope, instructional leadership as well. I've talked about some of the areas that I think are important to develop and support our teachers, and the fact that I want to create an organization that honors and values and celebrates the work that our teachers do and focuses on continuous improvement. And then the only place where I would say remediation would be necessary is I've spent 13 years in the state of Tennessee, in Knoxville no less, the home of the Volunteers. So I might need some remediation around this whole Florida Gators thing.
I can teach you all about the Gators.
And I'm good. I'm from Boston, Massachusetts originally, so I'm good with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I'm all in Tom Brady and Gronk and all that, but I might need a little help and scaffolding, as we like to say in education, around this Florida Gator thing. I can get there, I'm sure, but it might be a little transition.
Thank you. And what is the most important part of the superintendent's job, and why?
The most important part of the superintendent's job is to, I believe, to lead instruction. The most important part of the superintendent's job is to make sure that our teachers have the tools, the resources, and the support that they need to do their job. And that our principals, our leaders, and our staff have the tools, the resources, and the support, and the room to do their job. Oftentimes, I feel like part of the superintendent's job is certainly to keep focus on the important work that's happening in the classroom and make sure that that continues at a high level, but it's also to try to insulate, honestly, our principals, our teachers, from some of the things that could be distractions and could take them off of their game and could take them away from that important work of educating children. So I feel like, leadership, communication, working with the board to set a vision, strategic planning, all critically important. Safety of our students, facilities and operations and finance are all critically important. But instruction is where our bread is buttered. And instruction is where the rubber hits the road and where the magic happens in the classroom. And so the primary job of the superintendent is to make sure that we have a culture that supports great instruction in the classroom, a culture that focuses on the needs of our students, and that the people who work in the school system have the wherewithal, have the support, have the tools that they need to continue to do that great work with our children every single day, and make sure that our kids are growing and learning and developing and have the opportunity for a bright, competitive, and successful future.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Reynolds. And now we're going to slowly begin to close our interview. So I wanted to ask you if you would like to make any type of closing statement or any additional information that you might like to share with our board. And if so, you may begin.
Thank you, Ms. Cunningham, and thank you to all the board members. Great questions, and I appreciate the conversation today. And again, I appreciate your service on the board and in this really important but somewhat thankless job that you do as school board members. I guess the only other thing I would say is, and I hope that you've heard this and seen this, I am passionate about this work. This work is important to me. This is my life's work. This is my calling and my vocation. And as I said earlier, I've got a great job that I love and that I enjoy. but I feel called back to the work of serving students. I feel called back to the work of leadership in a district because I know the impact that it can have for children in our community. I keep a number in the back of my head, Mr. Wilson, I know you probably keep numbers in the back of your head. I keep a number of 443, and that's the number of students who graduated from the Knox County schools in 2016 who would not have graduated if we had stayed at our old graduation rate. If we had stayed at 79%, we graduated 443 more students in 2016 than we would have had we stayed at that graduation rate. And I think about those 443 young people. I think about those 443 lives that were changed and transformed because of the work that we're able to do with the board and with our community, with our teachers. I think about the 443 hands that I shook as they walk across the stage and embarked on the rest of their life and the rest of their future. And I think about what a transformative impact that work had on those 443 lives, but also on the lives of their families, on the lives of their children, eventually on the lives of our entire community. And that's part of why I really am passionate about this work, because I think this work of offering high-quality public education transforms the lives of young people. It transforms the future opportunities of young people. And that's why I'm passionate about it. That's why I love to do this work. That's why I seek to be an educational leader again. And that's why I hope you'll give me consideration to be your next superintendent here in the Polk County Public Schools.
Thank you, Dr. McIntyre. And I also wanted to ask you if you might have any questions for our board while we're here.
Yes, I think I would.
Okay.
I guess one of the questions I would have is, I would love to get a sense of if there is a unified vision of the board or a unified direction that you see the board moving toward, or if there are sort of different perspectives on the direction that the school system needs to move in for the future.
That's a great question. Board members, would anyone like to answer? Mr. Wilson, go ahead.
So I think we're probably pretty unified on the overall strategic plan, but I think we all have different perspectives of specific, things that need to be addressed in the school district. So I think that would be a pretty good overview. Would you agree?
I would definitely agree. And I think, because I think the blessing that we have here is the fact that we all come from different, not only areas of the county, but from varied backgrounds. So we bring a different perspective, which is what is, to me, very unique. And I always enjoy that because I learn from my colleagues all the time because of their background and what they bring to the board. So saying that, though, I believe, and I won't speak for them, but it is my opinion that we are all about students first. I can't ever recall a time when a board member said, oh, we need to go this direction because it impacted that person personally. Everybody's looking on behalf of students. As Mr. Wilson indicated, we do have a strategic plan, and once the new superintendent comes on board, we will definitely have a retreat to talk about those things. But I feel like we're pretty unified as a board, and that the priorities continue to remain to do the best for our students, certainly our staff, and as you indicated, COVID has presented its own set of issues as we move forward that we've learned from, but we need to take that into account and be able to move forward. Anyone else like to add? Yes, Ms. Fields?
I would just add, we have 7 different personalities, and the way that each of us do things could be completely different. But I think at the end of the day, we want what's best for our students. It just might be that we might do it in a different way, but at the end of the day, I think that if we had to make a decision on what's best for our students, we would all do what is right for all of our students.
Outstanding. That's great.
Anyone else? Yes, Mrs. Miller?
Just want to say, as a relatively new board member, I don't know if you have had a chance to look at our strategic plan, but what I could tell from our last retreat is I think we're moving towards the vision of the whole child. And that's something that we worked on. We started to work on, but we weren't going to, we had no intention of changing a plan in the middle of trying to complete the plan that was in action.
Right.
But I think I agree with Ms. Fields. There are 7, everybody comes from a different environment and a different background, either in advocacy or whatever their experience has been, but we really are, I think, very unified on it's about students. And I know that was the conversation in COVID. We haven't met together in that capacity in a while, but I know that was really important to me, and I saw that in other districts. I don't know what you have experienced, but strategic plans moving from not only data-driven and letter grades, but talking about the whole experience.
Absolutely.
And that's something I think that we need to that we're going to move forward in that direction.
Wonderful. Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I think, I think particularly with COVID, that has really amplified and magnified the need to address all aspects of the development of our young people, and including social emotional wellness. And certainly, I'm a big fan of things like the arts and career technical education and all of those priorities that you all have identified as well. May I ask one more?
Absolutely.
So just, okay. Okay, good. I think I would love to hear, you sort of asked me what I thought some of the priorities might be. I'd love to hear what you all think. What's the top priority or few priorities that you might want the new superintendent to address right away?
Okay, Mrs. Fields?
We do have some of our schools that are in turnaround status. So I personally, and I think the other board members as well, but I can't speak for them, I would really want the new superintendent to come in and continue the work that our current superintendent has done with her team.
Very good.
Thank you. Mr. Wilson?
I've advocated for a new COO. We have a chief of staff position. We've called it, and it could have any name, but someone who would be responsible for the business side and the audit that Mrs. Miller had talked about. I think that's important for us. But finding those resources. I mean, you mentioned we have a $2 billion budget. How do you find the resources and make sure you're getting them to the right place? So I think that's something that's important for me moving forward.
Very good.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Ms. Reynolds?
Thank you. I think you mentioned a couple times that we're not in crisis. So I think just making sure that we understand the full community. Every one of us has a very different area that is totally different from night and day, from across the street sometimes. So just understanding the full community, the strengths in every area, and how diverse we are, making sure that we're putting the resources to where they're most needed, and that we have equity throughout each and every one of our schools.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Reynolds. Mrs. Miller?
I just want to, kind of reiterate what Mr. Wilson said, and to do some of these things, it's going to take key players. We have about 3 or 4 cabinet positions that are in acting status because they're vacant. And so we don't have the pipeline of leadership, here with us, even though we have some excellent district leaders that I think with the right supports could fill some of the roles, but probably going outside of that will have to be done. And doing that equitably and within Polk County and drawing people that understand this district, I think is a priority for me and for the district leaders who have done their time here and want to see people that have the same priorities they have in those positions. So I think that's the most important, to start with that supportive team.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Miller. And I would like to add the leadership at the cabinet level. There's several vacancies now, several that have been mentioned. And I would like to see us put a priority on filling those positions in order to support the new superintendent. And I think our current superintendent was very graceful in not filling those to allow the new person to do so. Having said that, it is very important to me that we do look at the internal candidates that we currently have in our system, because I do believe there'll be opportunities for some very qualified folks to move up who are ready to do that. So I would hope that the new superintendent would not, wipe out, if you will, the senior level administrative team and bring everybody from another area. I can understand where a key person or two would be brought forward. That's understandable. But I want to see our leadership internally have the opportunity to move up. And then secondly, probably one of the most important things for me is communication. I think that's a real area that I would like to see us move forward in with our new superintendent and new cabinet and staff.
Very good.
Thank you. Ms. Fortney?
Yeah, I'm going to come from the classroom end of this, and that would be the autonomy of those that are doing a job well done already, and using them as models, and let's pay those models instead of an outside consulting firm to show us what's better and bigger for Polk County, because I believe our experts are among us, and I'd like to reward them financially. And that would include everybody from our custodial staff to our food service to our bus drivers. We have experts at every level. And I'd much rather pay them and tap them to do that work than hire people that we do not know. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. I appreciate that experts among us. I like that phraseology. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Fortney. Okay, I think this is going to conclude our interview. It's been a long morning, and I invite you, I think, with the others to have lunch with us. Here, whoops, I'm so sorry. I did not see your hand up. Sorry, Dr. Allen, please.
I'll be the quiet one over here.
Yes, I didn't see your hand.
Because obviously I'm the most recent, so hearing everybody's perspective, this has been actually really good because I haven't had this opportunity to hear their interest as well. I mean, I could look at our current, strat plan and see what I connect it with in relation to that. So having that opportunity, obviously we're coming on the backside of that strat plan.
Right.
So I'm excited about that future conversation. Some things that I've heard just in observation from Superintendent Byrd that she would love to have is a little bit more qualitative measurement in regards to our schools and allowing us to tell a bigger story about the successes of each school and not letting one measurement tell that story. And I could definitely see some avenues for that. The career readiness, that's definitely a part of my initiatives as well. So making sure that we're placing academies effectively in relation to what our partnerships are within the community. So it's going to service and allow that student moving out of their K-12 experience into our community for that success. Now we could talk about like the rigor, right? I love that conversation that you brought to the table here as well, and we want that. I love what we just did with Cambridge. But also what I'm hearing though is some of the challenges, say at like our East area, West area schools, and so forth, in some of these areas. I would love to see, and I know Tennessee actually has different opportunities for high school equivalency. The state of Florida's only one opportunity, and that's the GED specifically. So I'd love HISEC to be an option for high school equivalency as well. So we can look at like high achievement, but look at all these other, you talked about it, multiple pathways. So some of those brief conversations for me as the youngin here. So I've got more. I got a list here. But,
Very good.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you.
Allen. So this will wrap up our time together, and we will thank you so much for your interest and participation, and congratulations for being a finalist. And now we're going to break for lunch, and then we will be back here at 1:45 for our next interview.
Wonderful. Thank you for your time this morning, and I look forward to, I know I get an individual time with each of you on Friday. I look forward to that as well. Thank you again for the opportunity today.
Thank you, sir. Have a blessed day.
Thank you.